There's a war happening. The world is in a state of a war for the last 4 years. Somehow Indian economy has been unscathed till now. I'm given to understand that the Prime Minister has made some statements, but perhaps the reserves that we are looking at is fairly less than what it has been not communicated or what we think it is. The normal man on the street doesn't know. As an industry leader, what's your assessment of our current situation as a country in the context?
I think the government's done a remarkable job so far, given the situation. This is not a war of our creation. This is not a war that we wanted to be a part of. This is not a war that we provoked. But yet, the economic impact of this war is very significant on a country of our size. So I think given the situation, given the fact that we were pushed to the wall, if you will, what the government has done so far has been, I would say, very, very good, very positive. How this is going to play out in the future, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I mean, look at the crisis and the way it has unfolded in front of us. We were chugging along well as a nation. We were forecasting 7.5% GDP growth. Everything seemed wonderful until one fine day 4 weeks ago, the world changed. And I think our government has reacted well. People can question whether they should have been more forthcoming, whether they should have been reaching out to more parties more aggressively. We are very clear that we have taken a position where we are turning around and saying that we need to do what is right for India. Very clearly, we have taken a position that we need to protect our citizens, protect our economy, and take a position in that direction. The fact is, you and I have still driven over here in our vehicles to come for this podcast. So we do have fuel. Yes, we are facing some situations. We will have to have some level of belt tightening. There will be some impact on the economy. But I think so far, 4 weeks into the war, we have stood our ground well.
So, 2022 was when Ukraine war started. I do agree with what you said. However, 4 weeks is something that I'm not be reconciling with, that the worst is over. And you may just add to that. You also said that the government has taken has done a good job till now. I want to ask you there, what's your first opinion as a leader on a world forum? Is government right in condemning a nation that is critical for our existence as a nation? Because we are dependent on oil, we are dependent on gas, we are dependent on Middle East. And on the other hand, we have condemned them. So you think that the government is playing a level hand?
Well, the government has absolutely condemned the attack on the 7 countries by Iran. And India has co-sponsored the UN security resolution relating to that. And I think India has been very, very careful in terms of not commenting on US and Israel and what they have done to Iran from their perspective. So the provocation, I think our government has done a very good job in terms of refraining from commenting on that. Let's remember that the 7 Gulf countries, which in a way are getting impacted by what Iran is doing, impacts the lives of 9 million Indian citizens in the Gulf. It absolutely impacts India's energy security strategy as well. And let us remember, the Gulf is not just about crude oil. The Gulf is also about nitrogen. The Gulf is also about inputs which come into the fertilizer sector. It is also about helium, which is an important input into the semiconductor sector, a sector where India is betting its future on. So as far as India is concerned, we have a lot at stake with the Gulf countries. So it is not surprising that we stood and co-sponsored with 135 other countries when they turned around and said that Iran's actions on the 7 Gulf countries was clearly uncalled for.
So in the last 4 decades, you have gone through multiple sine waves. I want to understand, what is that we are not seeing? What is that the media is not talking about? What is that your experience makes you give sleepless nights considering the situation, that macro situation that we have, but it's not been analyzed and spoken about in the public?
Well, a lot of things have been spoken about, but just about the focus and the underlying attention that we are giving. Of course, every day we wake up, we hear more and more about the kinetic part of the war. And in your podcast, you speak to a lot of military strategists as well, who I'm sure will be able to throw more light on that. I think one of the important things that we should watch out for is the perhaps changing dynamic environment as far as geoeconomics is concerned. Now, as you know, one of the asks of the Iranian government has been that they want to apply a toll tax on anyone who is transiting through the Hormuz Strait. And you might have watched the news very carefully. In fact, there are 2 Chinese ships which did successfully make their way by paying $2 million in Chinese yuan, which was facilitated by a maritime intermediary from China. Now, obviously, what we have also seen of late is that 2 Chinese ships were turned back as well. Now, you could say that that perhaps is on account of the fact that it's a very difficult war. So at times, what you intend and what happens on the ground may kind of vary. But the reality is this has actually unblocked a very interesting potential phenomenon going forward in the future, that one of the major energy blockades in the world will get unblocked if you're willing to pay a toll, and that too a toll which potentially could be in Chinese yuan. And I think that that is something that all of us need to really worry and we need to watch out for. If that happens, there is potentially another superpower who will come onto the scene in a much, much more stronger manner going forward in the future as compared to what we have seen in the past. And again, as you know, this is one of the conditions Iran is putting, amongst others, to turning around and saying if this war has to abate, the world has to agree to allowing them to put a toll.
Yes, sir, I did read that. And in fact, interestingly, the month-on-month growth on their revenues because of this toll, I was reading somewhere it's going to increase by almost 25% because of the situation that is there. Now, my question, you mentioned an interesting point about being payment happening in yuans. Do you forecast de-dollarization to be a reality?
That's what I said, that the geoeconomics at the end of this war could be very different. Today, we are not seeing it play overtly in the fashion that, the world might pay attention to it, because the kinetic actions are obviously at the foreground. This morning, we woke up and we saw how Iran has gone and again impacted some of the US allies in the Gulf. And, that's what we really read about. But I think by the time this war ends, geoeconomics of the world and, in fact, the geopolitics and the alignments will be very different as compared to what we've seen thus far.
What's your assessment? So, I mean, you've seen such economic turmoils. Number one is, and this may be slightly out of your immediate pedigree, if I may say, but I'm sure you'll be able to answer that. One is that, what is your forecast of the war getting ended? Is it another week's conflict, or we are looking at a Ukraine-like possibility? Number one. Number two is, how long do you think, it's going to take us and the world to come out of the impact, the negative impacts of the war, economic impacts? We are already impacted as a nation.
Without doubt, we are impacted. When you're in business, you tend not to be a forecaster, because many times when you forecast, things don't go in the direction that you expect. But what you do is you prepare for scenarios. And I think that's what business leaders do incredibly well. I think we need to do the same as we speak right now. So if the war ends sooner, then how would the scenario play out? If the war takes longer, what could be the impact? And therefore, how do we need to prepare as businesses, as organizations, and as a nation? Now, if the war ends, and there are just multiple scenarios which could play out. So if the war ends, let's say, by the middle of this year, of course, there will be an impact on GDP. It could be a percentage point, half a percentage point, could be around 6.5%. Maybe that's the number. If it goes deeper in the year, the GDP is going to get impacted much, much more. So it could get impacted by maybe, a few more basis points. So maybe it comes down to 6% instead of 6.5% or 6.5% to 7%. But the impact is really not just GDP. I think what we have to watch out as business leaders is what is going to be the impact on consumer sentiment? What is going to be the impact on inflation? What is going to be the impact on costs? And ultimately, what is this going to impact us in the medium term? In the medium term, India wants to hit $5 trillion from a GDP perspective. Now that certainly will get impacted in terms of timelines if the war were to continue deep into 2026. So depending upon what the scenario is, we need to be prepared. And we need to continue to calibrate.